Welcome to the Life Matters podcast with enlightening conversations on success and living well. My guests are all motivated by the desire to make a difference, and they share their wisdom, personal journeys, and a host of practical guidance that we can apply in our lives. Subscribe on your favourite platform and never miss an episode. Today I'm joined by Dr. Denise Tiran, an internationally acclaimed authority on maternity complementary therapies. Denise pioneered complementary therapies as a midwifery specialism in the 1980s at the University of Greenwich, where she developed one of the UK's first complementary therapy degrees. She has treated almost 6,000 pregnant women, taught courses for over 4,000 midwives, and helped around 100 NHS trusts to introduce complementary therapy services. She has undertaken several research studies, published many books, and written guidelines for practice for the Royal College of Midwives. She regularly teaches in Japan, Hong Kong, and elsewhere overseas. Denise was awarded a prestigious fellowship from the Royal College of Midwives in 2018 and an honorary doctorate from the University of Greenwich in 2020 in recognition of her 40 years' work in this specialist field. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you so much for inviting me to contribute to your podcast, Diane.
My pleasure. I'm delighted that you can make it. So I'd like to start, if I may, at the beginning. When you were growing up, did you always want to be a midwife?
Well, I went through the usual wanting to be a doctor, wanting to be a nurse, wanting to be a teacher. I used to play with dolls when I was very small, and either they would be in their hospital bed or they would be outside lined up as if it was a classroom. So I suppose it was always in my blood, although nobody in the family has been in the medical professions at all. And then when I got to about 15, I absolutely decided I would like to be a midwife, and I wanted to be a midwife ever since. And I don't actually know why. I think I went on a careers visit with a health visitor, but not a midwife. So it just sort of evolved from there, really, I suppose.
Wow, and 40 years on, here you are, still in the
50
profession.
years on.
So I'd like to ask you, how did complementary therapies find you and midwifery? And what sparked your interest there?
Well, I worked as a midwife, clinical midwife. I worked on the community in Surrey, and then eventually I went into teaching. And I was teaching students in Southeast London. Then I went on maternity leave and had my son, who was born at home. And I have always, as a midwife, I've always been fascinated by physiological birth. I do believe it is what women are meant to do. And I do believe we should not have too much intervention, which I'm sure we're going to come back to. But I had Adam at home, and then I went back to work when he was about 5 months old. And I was still breastfeeding him in the morning and in the evening, like you do, sort of expressing at lunchtime in the ladies' loo and that sort of thing. And whilst I was, and then I decided to do a reflexology course. I have no idea why. Somebody said, "Do you fancy doing this?" It turned out to be reflex zone therapy, which is a German clinical style of reflexology. But whilst I was on the course, I suddenly started to produce more breast milk as if I'd only just had my son. And I said to the teacher, "What's happened? Why am I suddenly producing more milk?" And she said, well, yesterday, if you remember, we were practicing on the foot zones that relate to the endocrine glands, and your partner who you were working with has just slightly overstimulated the pituitary gland point, which is in your brain, which stimulates milk production. And she's overstimulated it on the point on your foot, and you've started to produce more milk again. Well, that was like an absolute light bulb moment for me. And it went from there. So I was absolutely fascinated by reflex zone therapy, and still am. I would say it's my personal favorite therapy. But I then went to train in aromatherapy. because everybody trained in aromatherapy. And I loved it, but it wasn't a hugely good course, I would say. We did a lot of self-learning, and whilst the teacher was a really lovely lady and probably an extremely good therapist, the theoretical side was lacking a little. So I started to read for my own benefit. And we had just moved from schools of midwifery in the NHS to schools of midwifery in the higher education sector into what eventually became the University of Greenwich. And if you're a lecturer in the university sector, you're often given opportunities to develop areas of expertise. Bearing in mind this was the very late 80s and early 90s, when the general public was just becoming interested in complementary therapies, I was eventually given the opportunity to develop a short course, and that evolved into a degree program in complementary therapies. And I developed and ran the degree for about 14 years. But during that time, I did more training in complementary therapies. So I'm very fascinated by natural remedies and using those as alternatives to prescribed medication, that sort of thing. And one thing followed another. So I was teaching aromatherapy and reflexology at the university as part of an academic degree. And then like the NHS, it's very bureaucratic in the university system. And eventually I became a bit burnt out, I suppose, really. So I decided to set up my own training company, which has been going for 21 years now. So Expectancy provides courses primarily for midwives and also doulas and sometimes therapists. But it's around using complementary therapies within pregnancy, birth, and the early postnatal period to ease stress, to relieve some of the symptoms of pregnancy, to help women through the birth. So, as I say, we now offer a range of courses, and we've been going for 21 years. So I feel as if we've been doing something right.
Wow, yes. Well, I feel as though I've been under a rock or something because this is all so new to me. And I was surprised to learn that 80% of women will use some form of complementary therapy during their pregnancy. That blew my mind. I had no idea. So, what sort of therapies are people using, and how do they help them? If you could
Yeah.
touch on a few of those.
I mean, the 80% is variable. So, and there are several studies that say anything from 15 to 95% of women using different therapies, but it depends how you interpret it a little bit. I would say, however, that aromatherapy is by far the most popular of all the complementary therapies, and it's particularly welcome in pregnancy. I think one of the problems is that not only is it massage, but it's actually oils which contain chemicals. So it is important to be cautious with essential oils, with the aromatic oils. The next one's probably acupuncture. And we do provide an acupuncture course for midwives in expectancy because you can do so much more with that, I think, than aromatherapy, which tends to focus on that stress relieving element. Acupuncture is brilliant for things like back pain, sciatica, constipation and heartburn and sickness, those sort of things. So acupuncture is very popular. It's also fairly well respected in the conventional medical fraternity, and people do know about acupuncture. Then we have reflexology, which is where your feet are thought to represent a map of the whole body. So by working on certain parts of the feet, you can influence different organs or different symptoms and resolve those. And as I say, that's my personal favorite and the one that I use most of the time. I set up a clinic, a pregnancy clinic for women at one of the London hospitals, Southeast London hospitals, where we treated women for a variety of symptoms in pregnancy. But I would often combine therapies. So I might start with reflexology and then move on to incorporating some aromatherapy. I might give them advice on herbal remedies or homeopathic remedies. And certainly herbal medicine is another very popular, very well respected, very well researched therapy. But the problem arises when people who may not fully understand what that therapy is about, whether it's reflexology or aromatherapy or anything really, when they try to self-administer. And I have nothing against people, looking after themselves and selecting remedies and going for treatments that are appropriate. But I think there is still very much an attitude, well, it's natural, isn't it? So that must be okay. Of course, the message we have to get across is natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's always safe or appropriate for everybody. Um, so those would be the main ones. We do have other elements of therapy. So moxibustion has become very popular. It's a Chinese technique in which burning sticks are used as a heat source at a point near the toes, one of the little toes on the feet. And it's very good for turning a breech baby, bottom first baby, to head first, with something like a 67-68% success rate. So that is something that parents can be taught to do for themselves at home from about 34 weeks or 35 weeks of pregnancy. And even the Royal College of Obstetricians has mentioned moxibustion as something that could be tried. They don't give 100% approval because medical practitioners are always quite skeptical, but they do say that there is sufficient evidence on turning the breech baby to head first by using this particular Chinese technique. It is a bit weird because, there's all this burning stuff around and it smells funny. And I think I was sort of regarded as the resident witch when I was doing it years ago when I had my clinic. But it's very, very successful and very popular, actually. You can go to an
Wow. I mean,
for it, or you could be taught to do it yourself.
okay. I mean, that's an amazing stat, isn't it? 68% success.
It's better than when the obstetrician tries to turn the baby manually by massaging the mum's tummy. That's only about
Really?
40% successful. Yeah. Uh,
And I'm guessing that some of these therapies, and the oils and so on, in terms of, because I know you're very passionate about and very firm on safe practice. I suppose some of these things it depends on when during the pregnancy they're being administered. I suppose there may be some things that are safe at some times and maybe not safe at other times.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Certainly, the first 3 months when the pregnancy's settling in, and there is a slightly more risk of miscarriage, then mostly the therapies are not used a great deal unless it's under a very qualified and very experienced practitioner, and that is the time at which I would generally discourage parents from using herbal remedies and aromatherapy oils and things like that. If they're going for professional consultation, maybe they've had acupuncture to help with fertility issues, and then they continue having acupuncture for the sickness in the first 3 months and that sort of thing. That's fine. But I think it's primarily, and the things that concern me are the herbal remedies and the oils, because both of those contain chemicals and they act like drugs. And of course, parents are generally encouraged to not take medication unless it's absolutely necessary and prescribed. So as I say, it's the nipping to the health food shop to buy, some oils or some remedies, and then thinking that it's okay, because for many it will be okay, for a few it may not. And remedies like raspberry leaf tea, that's very popular. But people seem to think it's something to bring on the labour, when actually it's a birth preparation remedy. So you either take tablets or you drink the tea made from the leaves of the raspberry bush. And there is research to show that it can tone up the muscles of the uterus, so preparing the body for the event of labour. But it shouldn't be left until nearly time to give birth. It should actually be started after about 32 weeks of pregnancy, and it builds
Right.
up, and then it helps the body slowly to prepare for good uterine action, good contractions during the labour. And, there is an awful lot of misinformation, I think, or partial information. Indeed, at one point, there was a study done on what information is given out on the internet on complementary therapies for pregnancy. And it was found that whilst most information is right enough, correct enough, it's the omissions that are not there that make it a little risky. And so I would say to mums to be very cautious about what they read on the internet, because it may be okay, but it might just not be, and I think that's the difficulty. It has to be safe. Otherwise, we've got both mother and baby potentially with an increased risk of something happening. So oils, for example, can put the blood pressure up. They can also lower it. Different oils will lower it. Some of the herbal remedies are contraindicated with particular medical conditions or complications in pregnancy. And as a general rule, I would say don't use anything unless you know absolutely what it's for and how to use it properly.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's very, very good advice. And in terms of going to trusted sources, obviously we're going to give out your details at the end of this. What other trusted sources would you recommend? Is there a directory of people who are qualified to give this kind of
Yes, I
advice?
mean, I think it's I think it's worthwhile looking for somebody who is also a midwife or
Right.
a practitioner of the main therapies who's also trained to work with pregnant and postnatal women. Very few therapists will support women during the labour unless they happen to offer doula services. But it's a matter of if they have insurance to practice and work with pregnant women, then they are likely to have had a good training, and they are likely, well, they will be a member of an accepted regulatory group. Regulation in complementary therapy is very variable, but the complementary and natural healthcare practitioners forum, that's a very good one. But I would still say probably if you can find a midwife who provides different therapy services, what will happen then is she or he will have knowledge and expertise on both sides of the spectrum, the maternity and the complementary therapies. So there's that ability to apply one element to the other, and to know when not to practice, to care for them. But there are some extremely good therapists around as well. With acupuncture and something like osteopathy or chiropractic, those are very well regarded. Osteopathy and chiropractic are regulated by law in the UK in the same way as nurses and midwives and doctors. And acupuncture and herbal medicine are also very, very well trained practitioners, 3 or 4 year degree program, even at master's level sometimes. So they have taken a long time to develop their skills, understand, gain their understanding and their knowledge. I think the problem arises with some of the more supportive therapies. So it would be things like aromatherapy, massage, reflexology, shiatsu, and one or two others. And it's not to say that the practitioners are not good. It's just that they may not have had as comprehensive a training as some of the other therapies will provide. But the watchword is ask if you're seeking a practitioner, ask if they have insurance to cover them for pregnancy and postnatal, and if they're intending to accompany someone during the birth, have they got specialist insurance for labour and birth? Because they can't assume that they can piggyback on the insurance that's in the hospital for the midwives and the doctors. They have to have their own separate insurance.
That's really good advice. Good to hear. And when you're training midwives, how long is the training in complementary therapies? I mean, presumably there's a series of courses that they can opt for. Can you give me an indication of what's involved?
Yes, I mean, I think it's important to say that during midwifery training, when somebody is actually training to become a qualified midwife, there is virtually nothing included on complementary therapies, which I have been campaigning for many, many years to, right that wrong. Because I think the Nursing and Midwifery Council sees this as something completely separate. What alarms me is the fact that so many expectant parents are out there wanting to try something. And if midwives don't have a basic understanding of at least the common questions, what can I do for sickness? Is ginger appropriate? Should I take raspberry leaf tea? These sort of common questions, then we are not helping the parents in our care.
No.
But what I provide is training for qualified midwives. So if they wish to specialize in complementary therapies, we are unique worldwide, actually, in providing this range of courses. I feel very privileged to have been in the right place at the right time. And we offer full academic programs. So obviously there's clinical, well, not practical training, but they are taught and assessed at a very high academic level. There are, of course, lots of other courses around. Some are very good, some perhaps not so good. I think if a professional was looking for a course, it's not about how long it is, it's about what they're learning. And the most important thing is, are they learning the therapy and then able to apply it to maternity care, whether that's pregnancy, labour, or postnatal? And also, do the practitioners learn how they fit with the maternity services? So, if a qualified practitioner of a therapy wanted to accompany a woman in labour into the hospital, what do they know that they need to do or not do? For example, they need to understand that if a complication starts to develop, they will step back and not sort of press on with their therapy. They need to understand, in fact, whether the therapy could potentially be triggering or contributing to a complication. Conversely, with midwives, there are some very short courses, especially in aromatherapy. But again, it's about, can they apply the principles of principles of aromatherapy to their midwifery practice? What are the limitations on midwives working under their Nursing and Midwifery Council registration? Which might mean, for example, that some elements of, let's say, aromatherapy can't be used in the maternity unit. Diffusers, for example, are not appropriate. In fact, they're against the health and safety regulations in a maternity unit. But if a woman's having a home birth and wants to use a diffuser to have fragrant oils into the atmosphere, that's fine, so long as it's not too much or for too long. And the midwives need to know those sorts of things. So it's a bringing together of the two elements, the maternity and the therapy elements. And midwives, we have midwives who've done long programs with us, year-long programs, and they have then gone out and set up in private practice offering complementary therapies for pregnant and postnatal, mainly women. And they're doing very, very well, because I think women do appreciate the fact that the therapist is also a midwife, and they can ask some questions about their standard pregnancy issues and that sort of thing.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I think I read that there are around, I'm just reading this, 100 ways to start labour naturally. That's a lot. Can you talk about a few methods?
Yes. I
Do you
mean,
think also, do you think this is important? You know, do you think it's important for people to know that there are these natural methods?
well, I mean, if we exclude some of the African remedies like drinking baboon urine or eating elephant dung, which may or may not work, yes, I mean, there are some common things that women like to try. But again, I would urge extreme caution. I think the main thing to remember is babies come when they're ready. But the difficulty they have these days is that there is so much pressure put on families to have the baby delivered when the doctor thinks it's appropriate. And that means that if they don't want to have an induction of labour or a caesarean section, it means that they're going to start searching for ways to help themselves. There are lots of ways. Raspberry leaf tea may help. Pineapple, eating pineapple is thought to help because it contains a chemical called bromelain, which affects muscles, smooth muscles in the uterus. The problem is some people are allergic to pineapple, so they shouldn't be using that one. Dates, eating fresh dates is another common one. And in fact, in the Middle East, where dates grow profusely, women are told you should not eat dates during pregnancy because it might bring the labor on earlier. And I think, some of the food elements are fine. And in America and increasingly over here, women are using evening primrose oil, but there is variable research on that, and there are some side effects. So it needs to be done with care, whether you take them orally. Some people advocate putting evening primrose oil capsules in the vagina. But again, it's little is better. It's little less is more, really.
Mm.
And I think the big message is not to try everything all at once. Yes, you could go for a therapy, reflexology or aromatherapy or acupuncture, acupressure. There's a lot of research on that, but not pushing everything all together. If one doesn't work, you can always move on to the next thing, but using them all together overwhelms the body, and then often labor doesn't start. Its pregnancy is prolonged actually by using too much. So it is a case of just a little bit, try it out, try the next one. Of course, don't start anything before 37 weeks of pregnancy. So, babies come anytime between 37 and 43 weeks of pregnancy. But the biggest problem these days is this coercion to have an induction or even a cesarean for, in my opinion, sometimes somewhat spurious reasons, like somebody's very heavy or their baby is slowed down a little bit. But babies do slow down a bit actually before the birth. Obviously, it's wise to be guided by the medical professionals, but I think women have to be assertive enough to say, look, I really don't want an induction, so why are you suggesting that I have one? And sometimes, of course, it is vital to have that baby delivered and for the woman to give birth. Other times, a little bit of relaxation will encourage the birth hormones. So if you reduce stress hormones, the birth hormones increase. And therefore, things like relaxation treatments, massage, and things, probably one of the best ways to aid that process and not sort of overburden the body with a whole load of different remedies and therapies and things. And also, again, go to somebody who is used to working with women very late in pregnancy and, make sure that they know what they're doing in terms of helping the body to go into labor. But I think that the thing I feel really quite strongly about at the moment is that babies do come when they're ready. And if you just wait and relax, it'll be fine for the vast majority of women.
That waiting and relaxing doesn't fit with modern lifestyles very well, does it?
Doesn't, no. And I mean, I've been a midwife now for nearly 50 years. And when I first started, it was very much people didn't work so much, women didn't work as much. If they did, they stopped work 2 or 3 months before the baby came. They just let nature take its course. In fact, even getting pregnant, nature took its course. It's you either did or you didn't. And these days, of course, most women are working right up until the birth. They don't give themselves time to relax and to rest and to prepare physically and emotionally. And there's a huge expectation that everything will go swimmingly, and that you'll get through the pregnancy without any symptoms. Well, I'm afraid if you don't have symptoms, maybe your hormones are not high enough, and actually symptoms like sickness and backache are good symptoms. Not pleasant, but they're good symptoms, because it means your hormones, your pregnancy hormones, are you know good enough to keep the pregnancy going. So
It's interesting.
it's we are in a very difficult stage at the moment, and there is worldwide concern about the number of cesareans and the number of interventions in childbirth. But if a woman can, be assertive, find out what she can before she goes to the hospital to sit for an antenatal appointment, and say, I really don't want this, or I would prefer to have that. And of course, choice is really important. If somebody really wants a cesarean and has good justification for it, then that's fine too. But I do think people have to realise what all this intervention may bring. And it isn't, I've heard women say, well, I want a cesarean because it's going to be less painful. Yeah, the birth may be less painful because you're anaesthetized, but afterwards it's like having had a major operation, like having your appendix out, and then you've got the baby to care for on top of it. So, I am absolutely in tune with women having choice, parents having choice over their pregnancy and birth, but I don't think they always get it, unfortunately.
Mm. Which is why it's so good to be talking to you. We've sort of touched on it, but I think you've probably got some other thoughts. Over the past 40 years, what are the changes that you've seen in the practice of midwifery and birth? We've touched a little on that. What would you say are the main changes, and the complexity perhaps of pregnancies now?
Yeah, when I started midwifery, it was not too far distant from when Call the Midwife was situated, and in fact, I trained in the East End of London, almost in that area where Call the Midwife was, and the midwife was your friend. You might have another baby, and it would still be the same midwife, and many more women had babies at home, and nature was left to take its course quite often. And I do think that technology and advances in maternity care have obviously been really very good. What I think at the moment is it's very overused, but we have to have the technology and the investigations and the changes there. But I would like to see a return to more normal birth, physiological birth, without all these interventions. I think the other thing is that, um, as I was saying earlier, women are working, their bodies are being used differently. We are sitting more. We sit at computers, we sit in our car, we slump in an armchair to watch the television, that sort of thing. And that's not doing a very good job for helping our body and our pelvis, our structure, um, prepare for giving birth to a baby, because the baby has to come through that canal. But if you have spent a lot of time sitting down, which we all do, then obviously the position of your pelvis can change. There are some very good antenatal classes that you can do on things called biomechanics, where you learn to use your body in a better way, to exercise gently for better positioning of the baby ready for the birth. But that was part of normal midwifery when I first started, and we didn't have many machines, actually. In fact, I remember I was just about to qualify, and the ward sister on the antenatal ward, which is where women have been admitted with problems, said to me, "Go and put that lady on that monitor. They are too expensive to lie idle." And I was petrified. I didn't want to use the machine, and I'm not sure the lady I was looking after really wanted it, but she needed better monitoring, so that was the reason for it. And of course, now almost all women who are in hospital will be attached to a monitor at some point to make sure that the baby's heartbeat and the contractions are coordinated, and one isn't outdoing the other, sort of thing. But yeah, it's I do wish for a bit of a return to some of the older days, but of course we didn't have as good results. Of course, women did die in childbirth occasionally, more so than now, and babies, of course, often died. Um, Labours were sometimes excessively long, and we didn't have the recourse to cesareans that we have now. And everything has a good side to it. It's when it gets overused that we start seeing, well, perhaps we could go back to some of the more natural ways, really.
Yeah, almost the pendulum can swing too far sometimes, can't it?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see in maternity services? What would you like to see happen over the next 10 years?
I absolutely would like to see a reduction in the induction of labour and caesarean section rate. We have induction rates in some units approaching 60%, and you're not telling me that only 40% of women can go into labour by themselves. We have caesarean section rates approaching 50%, between 40 and 50%. And, are women going to evolve with a zip down the front so we can just lift that baby out? I sincerely hope not. I'm being a bit flippant, but the principle is we need to get that intervention down. We need to return to understanding that birth is a natural process. You can't hurry it. The more you interfere, the more you need to interfere more. We call it cascade of intervention. And if women were encouraged during the present pregnancy to maybe have relaxation treatments, not necessarily to give up work if that's not possible, but to look after themselves better, and to enjoy some relaxation, and then let their body do its own work. I think that's really, it's about getting this balance between doing nothing and doing so much that actually you've almost gone back the other way. It's a big round circle. Um, and I very much would like to see those intervention rates reduced considerably. I would
Yes.
think if we could get induction rates down to 25% and cesareans down to possibly less than that, well, that would be a really good thing. Realistically, I'm not sure we're ever going to go back as low as that, but we certainly need to be looking at it. And the same is being said by the International Confederation of Midwives, by regulatory organisations of midwifery in Australia and in America and in various other parts of the world, Western world, really. So I think we need to return to viewing childbirth as a normal physiological life event, psychosocial event, but also a biological event that the woman's body is designed for.
I think that is such an important message. Thank you very much indeed. If people want to find out more um, about you, what's next for you actually? What are you going to do next? Because you've done
Well,
so much already.
well, for health professionals, maternity professionals, Expectancy provides the courses, so that's my company. Uh, I'm getting close to the point where I might need to start winding down a little, but I don't intend to at the moment. And I actually would like to write my memoirs. I would love to, I have written quite a lot of textbooks over the years. I think I've probably had enough of that now. I would like to write my memoirs and tell people what it was like as a student nurse in the 1970s and a student midwife in the early 1980s, and then, taking everybody through. So maybe I'll do that. I don't know.
think
Yeah.
I think that would be an amazing thing to read. Have you got lots of photos from then as well? Have you got
Not a great
photos?
many, but I've got a few. Yes, looking very demure in my hospital uniform, and we had our uniform dresses measured. We had our hair length measured. You were not allowed to wear perfume as a student nurse. So, I'm one of those people finding myself saying, "Oh, in the old days," But of course, that's not entirely true.
I know. You say you're very, very current, and I know you're still teaching all over the world and speaking and so on. So, yeah, it's nothing about the old days with you, Denise. Thank you for today. It's been amazing. So the website is www.expectancy.co.uk. All right. And that's the best way to find out more information about your courses. And we have a lot of information on the site. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I've learned so much. Thank you, Denise.